All right, so let's get into this, guys. Are you guys running on a deficit? And the reason why I'm going to talk about this is because it can explain a lot of the reasons why people don't feel very good, or why people can have some issues even with depression or with chronic dizziness, hormone function, detox function, high blood pressure, a lot of different things. And it has to do with this concept, and it's called methylation. And I know that probably some of you right now are having an absolute heart attack right now because we're going to talk about biochemistry, all right? And in fact, that was the classes I hated the most in college and in postgraduate school, was anything that had to do with chemistry or biochemistry. And I wish I would have understood it better. So I know a lot of you probably don't like chemistry. But here's what methylation is. It's nothing that's like super special inside of the body. What methylation basically is it's the donation of a carbon and 3 hydrogens from one substance in order for it to get donated into another substance, okay? So I want you to think of it as kind of like you have like this one substance that's constantly donating this carbon and this 3 hydrogens in order to perform different body functions, okay? So there's nothing necessarily special about methylation. However, the thing that's special about it is just the abundance of how much it happens within your body. So here's what's interesting, is that they estimate that a methylation reaction occurs 1 billion times every second. Can you imagine that? 1 billion methylation reactions are happening every second inside of this body, okay? So let's talk a little bit about biochemistry. So if this is happening that much, maybe this is something that we should be looking into. Maybe this is something that we should actually be testing if it is happening so many times, and how much it's actually contributing not only to how you feel, but how well things are going, because it happens with so many different types of reactions. So here's where you need methylation, okay? Now, it's happening all over the body, but I will tell you that 85% is actually happening within the liver, okay? So just remember, guys, the liver is so important. It is so important. And in fact, many times doctors don't even measure. They're only measuring the liver for fires, okay? They're only measuring it for fires. Elevated liver enzymes, basically that's when they're saying, oh, you have some liver issues, okay? The liver is doing so many different things, but how many times have you guys actually thought about how your liver is doing, okay? So where does this methylation take place? Well, it happens in the muscles. So methylation is needed in order to contribute to energy production within the muscle tissue, okay? So it's responsible for muscle contraction. In fact, you need this donation of a carbon and 3 hydrogens to go from arginine, which is an amino acid, into the production of creatine, which actually helps with muscle contraction. This is really interesting because I deal with I work with a lot of athletes, especially in the field of competitive exercising known as CrossFit. They always ask me, they say, well, what about creatine? Should I be using creatine? And I always will say this. I said, if you take creatine and you all of a sudden see your performance go way up from taking creatine, then yes, creatine, it's okay to take, but maybe you should take it a step further and say, do you have a problem with your methylation, okay? So yes, it's involved in the production of creatine. It's involved in the production of DNA and RNA synthesis, and also healing and repair, which is why, guys, again, if you get any kind of oxidative damage, you actually have enzyme reactions that are taking place within the cell nucleus, that's healing and repairing that DNA against that oxidative damage. You have it involved in gene regulation. It's called epigenetics, okay? How many times does your doctor say, well, it's just genetic? And I'm going to tell you this. If your doctor says that it is just genetic, what they're really saying is, I have no idea, and that's my go-to answer. So gene regulation, epigenetics, guys, I want you to know something, is that genes are constantly changing, genes are constantly evolving, and they evolve based on your lifestyle and based on their environment. Genes are they're not a destiny. And in fact, really what they are is they're changing to the body's external environment. So you have a really poor external environment. Guess what? The DNA is actually going to change. This is the whole idea of epigenetics, above your genetics, meaning environment dictates genetic function and not genetic function will determine your environment. So what about detox? So yes, I know that detox gets thrown around there so much. I know that some people throw it around like they're detoxing everything. Now there's some people that when you talk about detox, they actually roll their eyes and they're saying, well, you got a liver and kidney, you don't need to detox. Think of this, is that liver is doing so many different things. And in fact, there's 6 different detox pathways. One of them is actually methylation. So it's not all of your detox pathways, but one of them is in fact methylation. And in fact, if you cannot methylate very well, it is very hard for you to be able to remove your different estrogens, okay? So all of those different estrogens, they need to be converted in order to be removed. If you cannot remove your estrogens through the liver, through a process of methylation, then one of the things that happens is you're going to have very high estradiol levels. You have very high estradiol levels. I want you to think of this. You are going to, the tissue that is responsible for, that reacts to those hormones will always keep building. So I want you to think of things like endometriosis, adenomyosis. I want you to think of breast cancer. I want you to think of those things. So this is why even your ability to be able to methylate is involved in cancer as well. Think of energy production, okay? So you have poor energy. I want you to think of, am I methylating correctly? Think of your lipid metabolism. I'm going to actually show you why, if people are actually poorly methylating, why this actually will in fact be a better indicator of cardiovascular disease than it will from having high cholesterol, okay? If you look at your neurotransmitters, so yes, even when you're talking about things like anxiety and depression, this is involved with methylation. Even with the production of what is known as adrenaline, or from norepinephrine into epinephrine, is a methylation reaction. So poor methylation, you will actually not be able to have very good adrenaline production. If you are chronically low in adrenaline, I'm going to tell you something. You will have a problem with energy. You'll have a problem with fatigue. You'll have a problem even with like Parkinson's disease. You'll also have a problem with getting very dizzy, or actually having a lower blood pressure rather than higher blood pressure. Also with nitric oxide production, which is huge because remember, nitric oxide production, the reason why it is so important is that it's important in the vascular system, because nitric oxide is actually one of the things within the tiny cell wall, the cell lining, the endothelium of the cell, that allows it to be able to open and to close. So if you have very stiff, very rigid arteries, remember, that is what is called arteriosclerosis, okay? So nitric oxide production, and yes, it's even involved with immune system function as well. So you guys can see that this is involved with so many different reactions taking place inside the body. It's not that it's some kind of special reaction, it's just that it is used in the body's biochemistry with so many different things. So guys, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to memorize this. This is basically part of the methylation pathways that take place, all right? Now, I want to make sure you guys pay attention to, because I know that I have got a lot of questions regarding, MTHFR gene mutation and things like that. And, people come to me and like, oh my gosh, I got an MTHFR gene mutation. My life is terrible. I'm destined for, to be sick and terrible. But I'm going to show you guys at the end, like, if you have some kind of, mutation, it is not a death sentence, okay? But I'm going to tell you what you're going to have some problems and issues with that you need to pay a lot more attention to, okay? So when it comes to methylation, basically, what happens is that it's just churning this flywheel all the time, and your first basically amino acid is called methionine, okay? And so what happens is that it then, through an enzyme reaction, that you need things like magnesium, and you also need potassium. See, guys, why you need your minerals so much, magnesium, potassium, turns into S-adenosylmethionine, and then that actually will drop off this methyl group for whatever reaction that needs to take place. And then you'll have the end result of S-adenosyl homocysteine, guys. You guys ever heard of homocysteine? Look that up, okay? Then finally, then it gets converted through B vitamins into what's known as homocysteine. Here's what's interesting, is we measure homocysteine on the blood, and you're gonna notice if someone's very high in homocysteine, I'm gonna tell you exactly why, but then what happens, it goes and then gets recycled back into methionine. Make sense? Okay? So basically, when you're looking at this and you're looking at this reaction, how much of this SAM or adenylyl methionine is basically how much cash you have on hand, or it's almost like how much you actually have in the bank. Okay, so how much you have in the bank is very important to make sure that all of those different reactions, you have enough cash on hand to make sure that you can pay for it. Okay, now if you have this SAW or acetylcysteine homocysteine, it's basically saying like, here's how much you have on your debit card, or here's how much you have on your credit card. So you want to make sure you always have enough cash on hand, and you don't want to start to rack up this huge debt or this huge deficit, okay? Because one of the things that'll happen is if you're racking up this huge deficit and you're not going to have enough of this, you're going to see a buildup of what is known as homocysteine, okay? Homocysteine is actually a better indicator of your cardiovascular risk than your cholesterol. But how many times your doctor actually told you that? And in fact, I will actually say, because remember, what is dependent on these homocysteine levels has to do with a lot of different things. And yes, it has to do with nutrition. Yes, it has to be dependent on if you have some kind of what are known as SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphases, which are basically just these little genetic variants. But it's largely dependent on your nutrition, but it's also dependent on how much B vitamins you actually are consuming. And that's why if you have a B vitamin deficiency, you are much more likely to have a heart attack than if you have high cholesterol, okay? Just so you know that. So cash on hand versus how much are you actually spending. So this is why for a lot of people, why if you ever gone to the drugstore or you go to the health food store and people are taking what is known as SAM-E. It's like, well, I'm going to run there, and man, I felt so much better when I started doing this. But again, we always want to get back to the reasons that why. Well, why could you be deficient? Why could you be deficient in the first place? Okay, so if you tend to be very dominant in what is known as SAW, also leading to very high levels of homocysteine. High levels of homocysteine. And I don't know if you guys can actually see this, but we measure homocysteine on a lot of people. And this person that came to me had homocysteine levels over 50. And in fact, they just said that the lab company said it's over 50. We don't even go higher than that. So what that means is when really normal levels where we like to see it at is 5 to 6, which so hers were literally over 10 times. Now here's what's interesting. If you would look at her, you would say this. She was type 2 diabetic. She had terrible energy. She had fibromyalgia, pain in every single part of her body. She had massive gastrointestinal issues. I mean, you name it, she had it. But a lot of the biggest issues was no energy and terrible pain, was on diabetes medication, blood pressure medication, literally on so many different medications when it comes to pain, including opioids as well. And so you see those levels so high with homocysteine, which means that she is a very poor methylator. There's an issue with methylation. And again, most of it's happening in through the liver, which is why she had so many liver type symptoms. So what happens if you have, you're a poor methylator and you have this buildup of what is known as homocysteine? Well, here's the thing. You can't detox out of toxins and hormones because methylation is one of the detox pathways. You can also have some really bad issues when it comes to some of your hormones, specifically for ladies. Estradiol. It's going to affect your sleep and moods. People who are having problems with methylation, it's actually linked to things like depression. Sometimes people can actually over-methylate, and it can lead to terrible, terrible anxiety as well. It can lead to cancer. It can lead to cardiovascular disease. It can lead to dementia and cognitive decline. Again, dementia too, because methylation is actually needed for specific neurotransmitters that are involved with things like memory. You can also have some issues with helping your DNA to be able to heal. So what do you think about it? Look at all the important things that are actually taking place. But the thing that I always say is well, if this is so important, then why aren't doctors actually measuring this? Why aren't they measuring this? And because remember, there is no drug for it. And again, there is no drug in order to fix and improve the adenylyl homocysteine, leading to elevated levels of homocysteine. There's no drugs for it. There's no drugs. So remember, doctors can't test you for things that they cannot give you a drug solution for, because when it comes to actually this, there is no drug solution at all, okay? However, you can test this. So this is what's so great, is that you can in fact test this. And this is what's so amazing. Like I said, we have an actual lab in our office, and so we do a lot of our blood draws and testing and things like that. I mean, we have people who actually call us and they just say, I just want the test, I want to do the blood test. We only do this for our patients that we're actually working with, okay? Just so you know that. But I want you to think you could actually test this, and you can look at this SAM-SAW ratio, okay? So how much cash do you have on hand versus how much are you actually spending? So how much are you in debt when it comes to this? And you can actually look at and measure, which is absolutely fascinating, this methylation status. So you actually will see that this person has this very low ratio, which means that they don't really have a lot of cash on hand, but they do have a buildup, or they built quite a debt when it comes to this. So I want you to think of this is that if they don't have a lot of cash on hand, they're not going to be methylating very well. If they're not methylating very well to be able to just do some of these basic processes that are taking place through the body, remember, one of the things that's going to suffer is going to be energy production and also detox, okay? So remember, the body says, I don't really care about energy, I don't care about detox, I don't care about any of that, but we do need to keep your arteries open, we do need to make some neurotransmitters, we do need to do some of those things. And so it always will give a preference to keeping you alive versus how you feel. So you look at this person, for example, and they've accumulated quite a debt. So what are you supposed to do about it? Okay, so what do you need to do about it? Well, first of all, you always have to test. You test so that you know exactly where you stand and what you need to be working on. But I know it also begs the question that a lot of people will talk to me about, well, what is MTHFR? So what is this methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, okay? So if you have this MTHFR gene mutation, basically what it means is that you cannot make the enzyme for what this is actually doing. So here is MTHFR right here. And then basically what it's doing is that it's actually adding an enzyme to help to oxidize and recycle vitamin B12, okay? So B12. So it's not a death sentence. Basically, if you have this gene mutation, basically what you need to be doing is making sure that you are actually taking in enough dietary intake of things like folate and vitamin B12, okay? Because here's what happens. You could actually have a genetic variant right here. You could have a genetic variant right here, right here, right here, right here, right here, right here. You can have all of these different genetic variants anywhere. So it's not necessarily, everyone talked about it, 5-7 years ago, and they're like, hey, I have MTHFR, this is why I suffer. But basically with people is they're going to have a big issue with recycling homocysteine and recycling into methionine in order for these methylation reactions to take place. So people who have MTHFR, if they're not getting enough dietary intake of B12 folate, then what happens is they tend to build very high levels of homocysteine. So they tend to have a lot of issues when it comes to their liver. They tend to become very toxic. They tend to not detox very well. They tend to, so a lot of things. They tend to build up a homocysteine. A lot of them have problems with the gastrointestinal system and being constipated. So the thing is that, guys, genetics aren't necessarily, they're not a death sentence. However, you can even test for all of these different, what are called SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms. And basically what it means is hey, where you just have a kind of a variant what's going on with your ability to produce these specific enzymes that help with these reactions to take place. So this thing is actually happening, and getting recycled all the time. So if you have a problem recycling it, you can be very low on cash for some of these methylation reactions. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense for you. So how do you have happy methylation? And this actually really interests me as well because, I have tested my homocysteine levels in the past, and they've always been kind of elevated. I'm like, that's interesting. why are those things, elevated quite a bit? So how do you know how well you're methylating? First thing is you always test. Always test. You always want to test, and you always want to see. Yes, we can actually be able to test for it. Genova Diagnostics has an unbelievable test that will help with this. But think of this. You always have to ask the question, well, what could be actually slowing down this methylation? So genetics. The only reason why I say genetics is this, is do you have these SNPs that are going on? Number two, what will slow down methylation? Guys, contraceptives that will do it. So if you're on birth control, why do ladies have so many problems when they're on birth control? And I think birth control is the greatest lie they ever told them, saying it fixes everything. Nope. It has caused so much collateral damage. PCBs, which is going to be in things like your credit card paper. It's in a lot of other things too, but that waxy stuff you see on the carbon paper is very damaging, especially to methylation activity. How about ACE inhibitors? So ACE inhibitors can slow down methylation. How many people do you know that are taking a blood pressure medication, specifically an ACE inhibitor? How about PPIs, okay? So proton pump inhibitors, also known as acid reflux medication. This can slow down methylation. And how about glucocorticoids, or when you're taking steroid medications, can do the same thing. So you guys realize is that many times, even just having one little problem, like for example, with a food allergy, that is then creating the actual stomach acid issue that you're taking a medication for, that then will actually devastate this enzyme reaction inside of the body. That's why you have to start looking at everything together as this Swiss watch. So you can see that many times some of these issues are actually just being caused, and the reason why you feel so lousy is actually because of the medication that you are taking, because the doctor doesn't know all the other collateral side effects that are taking place. And then you also want to say, what is creating an increased need for methylation, okay? So what is creating this increased need for methylation? And again, how do you know that is only if you're actually testing. So who are some of the people that need to methylate even more? Are people who are creating a lot of free radical damage. And who's creating free radical damage? Well, usually it's the ones who you have a really sassy lifestyle. So again, sassy lifestyle is going to create more damage inside the body. More of it's going to damage the DNA, and there's going to be an increased need in order to try to heal and repair that so that it doesn't turn into cancer. But here's that other one, and this is actually something that I've been guilty of in the past, is actually over-exercise. So a lot of times we work with athletes, and they're like, man, I've been working out, but I just don't have any energy anymore. I don't have that. And remember, when you exercise, you do in fact create free radical damage. And in fact, a lot of times, if you see some of these people, like, wow, how on earth did they get cancer? They looked so good on the outside. And here you have Mary. Sorry, I'm not making fun of any single Mary, but let's just say you have Mary, who is always so skinny. She's always so petite, and she's running 5 to 6 miles every single day. And listen, she can be over-exercising, producing so much free radical damage, because exercise will produce some free radical damage. And it also will cause an increase in these methylation reactions, in which you're just spending more cash, and you can get yourself into more debt as well, okay? All right. So you need to see all of those different reasons, but this is actually where nutrition can actually come in, okay? So you need to, generate this methylation flywheel, and one of the things that you have to do is you have to make sure that you're getting enough dietary nutrition. So things like choline, for example. So guys, choline, and what's interesting, this is going to be in the form of things like eggs, liver, and beef, okay? So choline. Now, I actually tend to be a little bit low in choline, only because I have a food allergy to eggs. So I don't have any eggs, so I have to get choline basically from taking a desiccated liver, and from also, eating some beef and some red meat. By the way, a lot of people have a food allergy to eggs. I won't go into one of the reasons why, but you can give me your best guess. But a lot of people have food allergies in which, the eggs will actually have an inflammatory reaction. So eggs are going to be off the table. You also need dietary sources of betaine. So some of the foods highest in betaine are going to be things like spinach, things like beets, quinoa, sweet potatoes, are going to be very high in betaine. And yes, beef and liver are going to have sources of betaine, but actually things like beets and quinoa are going to be some of the highest sources of betaine. This is why, if you've ever heard why taking beetroots or beet juice or consuming beetroots, why that can lower blood pressure, because it actually helps with methylation for the production of nitric oxide. So now you know. So active B12, folate, vitamin B6, magnesium, zinc, all of those things you really have to consider. So guys, I will say that if you actually measure those levels in people, they are low in everyone. So no one gets enough magnesium, no one gets enough zinc. Most people are so stressed that they're just blowing through their B vitamins all the time. And chances are that none of you are eating liver and not eating enough beef. And this is also one of the reasons why vegans have an issue with energy production, have an issue with methylation, is because even just for choline and the recycling of homocysteine into methionine, is you need to have animal sources of specific choline, okay? And really, the best way to get it and quickest way to get it, and the most abundant sources are going to be actually from animal products, okay? So hopefully, guys, that makes a lot of sense. So hey, are you running on a deficit, or are you do you have enough cash on hand? And guys, the only way for you to know is for you to properly test that, okay? The best way to know is properly test it. But one of the things that you guys can start doing right now is start eating more eggs, liver, beef, spinach, beets, quinoa, sweet potatoes. Making sure, I take plenty of B12 folate, about 6,000 to 7,000% of normally what I do. Also take things like B6. I also take magnesium. I also take zinc. Now, I always try to get it through dietary sources, but you know what? It is like almost 12 o'clock and I still haven't eaten today because I've been on the run since 7:30 in the morning. So a lot of times I just don't even think to eat because I'm always on the go. And I imagine the guys that you probably are as well. So guys, what do you think? Are you guys running on a deficit? So we took something that is very complex and hopefully you guys have a little bit better understanding of it. And if you do me a favor, guys, please share this with other people. So who should you share it with? Anyone who's having problems with hormone metabolism, anybody who's got low energy, anyone who's got dizziness, high blood pressure, chronic pain, that's just really just the tip of the iceberg. But really what they have to do is there can be an issue with methylation. All right. So hopefully, guys, that makes sense to you. And I'll be on next week to share something with you. But guys, if you got any ideas on what you want me to talk about for next week, I was actually thinking about why so many children have allergies and what you do in order to fix it. Okay. So let me know what you think. I'll be on next Saturday. Just make sure that you are subscribed to our page so that you get an update on when we will be going live so that you guys can join us. So guys, I appreciate all of you. I love every single person that joins us. I always appreciate your interaction. I absolutely love it. I adore it. And hopefully you guys enjoy these videos as well. And if you did, like I said, just make sure that you share this with other people as well. The test that we do is called a methylation panel, okay? So guys, be well. I hope you guys have an awesome Saturday and an awesome weekend, and we'll check back in with you guys next week. Be well.